All right, we're back with a bonus feature from Room for Nuance. We don't ever do this. Collin, you're the first person to ever get a bonus feature. So that's 2 exclusive clubs that you are in our very middling podcast.
One more exclusive than the other.
Yeah, I think so, yes.
Maybe I'll help you get to B level.
Brother, I'm praying for it. I'm praying for it. The harder we try, the worse things get. Okay, so we did an episode with Brett McCracken on TGC's new book, Scrolling Ourselves to Death. And we're not going to do a whole interview with you about that here because, again, we already did that. But you have a chapter in that book. So first, tell us what Scrolling Ourselves to Death is. Just give it, in case somebody's not familiar, give us an introduction to that, and then tell us about your chapter.
Scrolling Ourselves to Death is a 40th anniversary engagement with Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death,
which you haven't read it, you must now.
Absolute read. It's a media ecology, which is just a way of assessing the changes and transformations and effects of new communications media, specifically television.
Yeah.
So we come at that from a lot of different perspectives, but try to apply to the internet.
Yeah.
So essentially, if Postman were writing today, what would he say about social media? What would he say about any number of different things? Well, an interesting part of Amusing Ourselves to Death is that he talks about preaching. And he says something very clear and I think irrefutable, which was Martin Luther and Jonathan Edwards don't translate to television. You couldn't preach Jonathan Edwards' sermons on TV today. Yeah. And he said, he's, of course, go back 40 years to see when he's writing, you've got a lot of televangelists. And he said, there's a certain kind of preaching that suits television. It's highly emotive. It's highly manipulative. It's there are no sustained arguments.
A caricature. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Lady with the big hair.
And basically it's aimed at fundraising. Yeah. That's the ultimate purpose of it. So it's just not a coincidence that the prosperity gospel, which has been around for more than 100 years, that it's exploded and gone global in the television era. And it's also not a coincidence that when you turn on TV and you see somebody preach, that odds are it's going to be a prosperity preacher. Not in every case, of course. I know wonderful churches that broadcast their services or whatnot, but usually it's going to be that. So my argument then is, if he saw that television was a problem for the kind of sustained argumentation that Luther and Edwards provide, that it does not translate, then what does that mean for preaching with the internet in the last 25 years?
So what's the answer?
Well, the simple fact is that the relationship between the preacher and the congregation has inverted. It's flipped with the internet. So before the last 25 years, you as the preacher, you're standing up. You have, in most cases, the education, or at least you have the preparation. You have the authority. You have just a basic knowledge advantage.
You're the subject matter expert.
Yeah, exactly. And this is no different from any other kinds of teaching. It's just one kind of teaching that's been affected this way. But now, because of the smartphone and the internet connectivity, everybody you're preaching to has in that moment a vast knowledge advantage over you because of their ability to access whatever they want immediately there. But that's not the biggest problem. Okay. The biggest problem is that with media, and that includes good media, you host a podcast, I host a podcast, we're spending good parts of our days doing podcasts. Mm-hmm. The point is that people are being discipled not just in those services, not just Wednesday night, Sunday morning, and Sunday evening, but morning, evening, and night all through their days, especially through their smartphones. Okay? Now, we hope that what we're doing in our podcast is edifying to them, but it's not all edifying. The biggest change, whether it's good, bad, or ugly, and it's all of the above, is that you can have people who are discipled by their smartphones in a totally different way from what you're preaching in the pulpit. In other words, they come to expect the preacher to be preaching what they already believe from their podcast hosts. I teach a class training pastors at Beeson Divinity School in Birmingham, and I asked them this question in January when we were discussing a lot of these things. I said, why do podcast hosts have more authority than preachers today. Like there's just this instinct that I can trust a podcast host. They're the guru, they're the insight. I can't trust a preacher. I think this is a huge problem, and I actually can't explain it, Sean. Okay. I asked the students, and they said, we agree that that's how it feels, but we can't explain it either. And I said, the argument is that the preacher, because he's leading an institution, is somehow, because of that leadership, he's corrupt. He's corrupt by the money. His message is corrupt. He's giving a sales pitch, whereas the podcast host is just telling you the truth.
Dispassionate, objective. All the incentives are good.
Yeah, exactly. But I thought, well, first of all, that doesn't make any. That's not close to reality. Yeah. I mean, that's not even remotely close to reality. As a preacher, you have measures of accountability. Not everybody does. It can be easily, unfortunately, abused.
And the horror stories do live larger in our minds than the faithful pastors who never have any controversy.
Exactly. But generally speaking, when you're preaching, you're constrained by the word, you're constrained by the Spirit. You're also constrained knowing what people are going to say to you about the sermon. Or at least at some level, you're mindful of it. Whereas so you actually are accountable in many different ways for what you're saying. Whereas the podcast host has any number of incentives to exaggerate, to manipulate, to lie, to spread conspiracy theories, any number of different things to make it sound like they're an authority and to bring you in the sense of intimacy. I almost wonder, Sean, also if there's a way that this conversational format, the voice even, invites somebody in to an intimate relationship in a way that the booming pulpit voice of the yesteryear of Billy Graham doesn't really connect.
Samuel James talks about that in our interview on digital liturgies. He says one of the reasons why new media is so enticing is because it makes you feel like you're just hanging out with your friends.
Yeah.
You're just in a room with people talking about a subject that you're interested in. So that's a very good point.
And that's, I mean, I think I have a better podcast voice than I do a preacher voice.
Okay.
It just, is, or like a podcast / lecturer, college lecturer, or something like that in there. So for me, is pretty much the same in there. But yeah, I think there is that sense of intimacy in there. But my point is that when people come into the church, they many times today already know what they think. They just want to know if you agree.
Yeah. Will you affirm my whatever?
Will you affirm whatever kind of thing I have? And that's always happened to a certain extent, but not like this, and not with the incentives of people to lie, to cheat, to manipulate with digital media. And that includes many people who are professing to be Christians or at least communicating to Christians.
Yeah.
So that is the inversion. The pastor was the authority. The congregation was kind of there to learn. Again, that's not a totally black and white thing in how that worked. But generally speaking now, the congregation has the authority to tell to confirm with their feet, with their money, with whatever, that you need to agree with me because I have the knowledge advantage.
The illustration I think I've heard you use to talk about this in the past is what WebMD has done to your local doctor's visit.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
You go in, you've done the research, right? This guy who spent a decade learning how to be a doctor, he doesn't know as much as you because you were on WebMD. You did a PubMed article. You read an abstract from a PubMed article. So you go in, you're having this weird sensation in your arm, and you know it's a blood clot. And you're going to go to 3 or 4 different doctors looking for somebody to tell you that that's what you have.
And the problem is, Sean, there is some truth to it. This is why things are so confusing because only you know your body. Okay, meaning that how does a doctor diagnose you? Doctor diagnoses you in part by asking you questions about how you feel. So part of it's your own testimony in there. Yeah. Also, doctors are really busy.
Yep.
They don't care about your health nearly as much as you care about your health.
Yep.
So there's that incentive is there.
They're also generalists.
They're also generalists, exactly. So they may be experienced to know these things. Some doctors are better than other doctors are. Also, how do doctors diagnose now? Well, there's a lot more use of artificial intelligence or Google searching themselves, or at least database searching themselves to find these things. These are also an advantage to them. Yeah. So it's not that there's no truth to the fact that hey, people have more access now to health information. They have more access to Bible and theology and culture and politics way more than 25 years ago, than 20 years ago. And hopefully by the work that you and I do, that's having a positive effect.
Yeah.
But it is a drop in the bucket compared to everything else, let alone the things that they can simply distract themselves with. Right. We shouldn't think that they're spending all their time listening to other pastors' podcasts. They're also just binge watching whatever.
Yeah. YouTube shorts for an hour.
Yeah, YouTube shorts for an hour, or just TikTok for 8 hours.
Yeah.
Straight, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's the basic shift in my basic argument.
Okay, so sounds depressing. What's the answer?
What's the answer? The answer is that we need to be more local. We need to be more specific. So the tendency, so I actually think that local churches should use things like podcasts to help disciple their members. I actually think it's one of the most encouraging and beneficial things that I can say, because staying in touch with people through the week in that format, diving deeper into, let's talk more about that sermon, or let's even talk more about what's happening in our community. Those can be really beneficial things. And the ease of doing it and the cost of doing it and the distribution of it is unprecedented. I think that's a real positive. But generally speaking, Sean, I think that pastors need to be thinking more bespoke. They need to be thinking more specific. They need to be thinking this is a challenge. As a preacher, your temptation is with the internet is to preach to everybody everywhere around the world. But that changes your approach as a pastor. It changes your sense of shepherding. It changes your sense of application. I think we're best as preachers when we actually are thinking of the people in our congregations. I don't mean in the sense of calling them out, like you, brother Jim, and your
glad
pride.
You're here today. You needed to hear this,
and we know that happens as well.
Yeah,
but just more of I think when you're standing behind the pulpit, there's no other experience like it, where you are seeing you're seeing the emotions, you're seeing the responses on people's faces, and you know more of their stories than anybody else does. So be like listening to the Spirit and actually delivering a message that is for those people in that place at that time is a gift and something that we should lean into, instead of trying to lean into trying to be the pastor to the internet. So I
have a friend who told me recently that he writes every text message thinking this could be read by the public. Regardless of what, maybe
just wait until somebody releases your browsing history someday.
Right. Or, to the Lord sees it, right?
Yeah, well, that's my point. Yeah. But that's part of the internet, is that it's the closest we have experienced to something like omniscience.
Yes. Oof.
It gives us that sense that we do know everything, or we should know everything, or that we can know everything.
Or everything that's said will one day be revealed, even to the public, not just to the Lord.
Yeah.
So,
but also you can fabricate all that too now because of the internet. So,
yes. So I guess my point with bringing that up was, sometimes preachers write a sermon like that. How could someone out there on the internet, and this is a danger the larger the platform you have, right? If 12 people are listening into your sermon audio stuff every week, that's not an issue. But if you know that 5,000 people are, well, that's going to factor into the way you write the sermon. And that's just so unhealthy. Go ahead.
Well, just generally speaking, there are some people who are gifted that way, and you and I have been blessed by their ministries.
Yes.
And I'm glad that we can listen to those sermons. Mm-hmm. But that should not be anybody's aim.
Yeah. It's the exception that proves the rule.
It's the exception that proves the rule. And so the more that we have churches that try to be all things to everybody, everywhere on the internet, not to these actual people, we're just going to get swept up into the internet noise. I think the more that we offer a real alternative and refuge from that world, the better off we're going to be, more faithful we're going to be, and I think ultimately more effective as well.
Well, brother, Your chapter is so good. I tried to, we couldn't make it work, get you to come up and even speak at our pastors conference, because pastors I know are feeling this. They're feeling it. They have people come into the church. I've had it happen. People come into their church. They get their mind made up about something. They come into your office. They lead with accusations rather than questions. They in theory, it's, hey, let's see if we can get on the same page. But it's really like, hey, when are you going to come to agree with me on this? And when you don't, they leave in a huff. Yeah. And so this is a very real thing. So I'm glad you addressed it in this book,
People can change quickly, too. I think one of the most agonizing experiences that pastors commonly have today that I don't think was the same way 25 years ago is the way, now, people did always leave your church for different reasons, but the experience of, I was there when your marriage was falling apart. I visited you in the hospital. I drove an hour down to Birmingham. You wouldn't, you to Huntsville or whatever, but I drove to catch you in the hospital at this situation. I baptized you, all those sorts of things. And then you listened to a podcast, and then you started binging on something, and you followed a guy on X, and now you think that I'm the Antichrist or whatever, or that I'm doing whatever. Really?
Yeah.
That's so this just one of the most common experiences I hear from pastors today. And I go back to 2020, and in 2020, I was hearing that experience all over the place from all kinds of different pastors. But here was my burden, Sean. Okay. They all felt like they had done something wrong personally. Mm-hmm. I said, guys, if it were only your church, I hear you. Yeah. If it's only your denomination, maybe we should be looking at the seminaries or something. If it's everybody, this is a digital revolution.
Yeah. Wow. Well, brother, let me say this. People love to whisper their encouragements and shout their criticisms. And I know that, forgive me, brother, I don't actually know the title that you have at TGC. I just think the guy in charge.
Vice President for Content and Editor-in-Chief, and then Executive Director of the Keller Center.
See, that's why I couldn't remember it. So, brother, you catch a lot of heat for any mistake that TGC ever makes. But I just want to say this as loudly and as clearly as possible. I think TGC has weathered many storms of accusation brought against it. And I think as a resource for pastors and for church members, it has stood the test of time. Like you said earlier about Tim Keller, no organization is perfect, no teacher is perfect. But this book, Scrolling Ourselves to Death, is exactly the kind of reason why I still love TGC, because you guys brought together amazing thinkers and pastors and theologians to write about a topic that nobody else was going to tackle, and you really succeeded. And I think you've blessed the church with this resource. And so I love you, I'm thankful for you, and I pray that God continues to bless your ministry.
Thanks, Sean.
And we'll sign off.